to the show with your friend and mine. So tell me, Dr. Squee, who's it gonna be this time? We like to hear you talk, but we love to hear you listen. And if you are not subscribed, you won't know what you're missing. So welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Headphones up, here we go.
Hello and welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. I'm Dr. Squee and this is my show. I feel like I'm coming to you from John Oliver's Blank Void, if anyone watches Last Week Tonight. There will be, I'll do up the studio soon. It'll look pretty soon enough. Tonight, with a slight change to the schedule of who I'm talking to, but we are going to be talking about the documentary Science Friction. So, and no, that is not a misprint. It's not just me being a nerd like usual. This is a talk to proper clever people. So we're going to be talking about this documentary, which explores when scientists get taken out of context in documentaries and different TV shows. So we're looking forward to speaking about that. Emery Emery, who was due to be joining us, unfortunately cannot. I tell you why, but it would only get cut. So we've got the writer of Science Friction, and that's Brian Dunning. And one of the contributors to the documentary, Brian Marlowe.
Hello.
How are we doing tonight, gents? Or this morning for you guys? I keep on forgetting this.
It's afternoon.
Excellent,
I'm
excellent.
on the East Coast, so it's afternoon and morning for him.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good night.
Thank you, and thank you.
Guys, look, I was just saying to you before we went live, I absolutely love this documentary. I thought it was really interesting to explore this this thing which is so topical in the age of fake news, and this is something which unfortunately has been going on a lot longer than that. So first of all, for you, Brian, and to, as much of this you can speak to, I don't know if you were
which Brian
in the oh, sorry.
Yes, for you, Brian. Yes.
You see, you notice my deliberate mistake there. Mr. Dunning. So
yes,
obviously you're the writer on this, so I don't know how much you were involved in the earlier production of it, but what was the original?
I'm the executive producer, so it was my project.
Brilliant. Okay, sorry, on different emails I got you.
So how come you didn't hire a better writer?
Sorry, Mr. D. Yes. What was the original kind of take on this? What originally inspired going into this?
So I'm basically a science writer for my career. I work for an educational nonprofit. We make podcasts, audio and video series, and documentary films. And so as a science communicator, I'm always being invited to go on these TV shows. You know, whether they're doing an episode about who built the pyramids or whatever it is, they want some scientist to come on and lend the science perspective. And so often I end up watching the show and it's like, most of the time it's just, they didn't cover anything that I actually said. They just, asked me to restate the myth, and then it makes it look like I believe the myth. But if they do show more, often they would cut it so badly that it would make it sound like I said often the exact opposite of what I actually came on the show and said. And from being in the science community, I know that this happens to everyone who's a science communicator, whoever goes on these shows. They all report having terrible experiences. Some of them have been quite dramatic. And so I started just talking to as many of these people as I could and say, hey, do we have enough of us that we can get together and put together a whole film, a documentary, and finally make the public aware, the general public, make them aware for the first time they've ever been given the suggestion that these TV shows are not necessarily being honest with how they present the experts that they have on.
Even on networks that are known for science or history content, they give every evidence, this is real documentary stuff. That's the kicker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the History Channel, I feel it's already blotted their copybook a little bit over the years. Their credibility may not be at the all-time high, but there's some other examples used here.
That ship sailed a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly, and it sailed to an alien planet apparently. But it's, it just seemed incredible to me, when the History Channel got most known for doing documentaries on aliens. This is the History Channel.
The History Channel, the Science Channel, Nat Geo. Really, 10 years ago, they decided, hey, we're going to do a lot better if we just throw it all to the wind and just make the same sensationalist nonsense programming that anyone else could. And unfortunately, that's where we are as a society.
And one
Yeah.
of the shows that I rant about in the documentary, this one about mermaids for Animal Planet, as much as we rant and as much as marine biologists I know were really upset by it, it at the time at least was the most successful program they had ever produced.
Yep. Yeah, it's
So
quite scary.
they're not going to be in a
these
hurry to pull back
Yeah.
from it. Yeah.
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 And just a quick note from Thomas Beckett: love documentaries, brilliant. This is one you definitely want to check out. I know you're a little bit of a science nerd like me, Thomas, so please do check this one out.
Thank you.
So where do you kind of get going with this? Do you start with examples which you know of that you want to explore, or do you start talking to friends, viewers in the community?
Well, so this is where we're missing our director today, Emery, who is unable to join us at the last minute, and he would answer this about when you're making a documentary, even though it's a documentary, you still need to construct a narrative, and that's pretty much what his job was to do. We wanted to be absolutely certain that we were not guilty in making this film of the same practice that we're criticizing in the film. So we wanted to be absolutely sure that we were clear, that we were presenting everyone honestly. Everyone who's in our film had the opportunity to view it and to approve their appearance in the film. And in fact, the very first line of dialogue in the film is one of our people saying, most documentary makers are honest. So we're not saying that everyone does this. We're trying to be very clear that this is a practice that happens sometimes. Then that's what we're being critical of.
Yeah, I did feel like whoever was the editor on this film must have had a sweaty few moments doing that, like think of the pressure of that in a documentary about people being dishonest and you're the editor. I wouldn't want to make a cut. I did
Imagine you
notice
might have to do your job honestly.
Yeah.
The horrors.
Well, the thing is, if you're doing it honestly, you're probably more worried about looking in any way dishonest. If you're doing dishonestly, you just don't care. That's the problem. A lot of the kind of laws seem to angle it around people who are going to be more honest about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I did notice like something that it did seem to be long form kind of chunks which you used in this. Again, was that kind of purposeful choice?
Well, we wanted to give each person time to tell their story. We wanted to give them time to say what they originally went on the show to say what happened to them in the editing room, and then, if appropriate, to clear the record, to make it clear what they actually believe. That no, scientists don't in fact believe that aliens built the pyramids. So yeah, some of the interviews are longer. In fact, the one with Ken Fader, the guy who talks about Atlantis, that guy is such a magician on camera. He is so friggin' hilarious and awesome to watch. We just turned the camera on and then just sat back and just let him go. And his segment is like 12 minutes long, and it's well, of course, for anything that except that Brian is in, it's the best part of the film.
Of course. I think any archaeologist, especially, I'm going to say, especially British archaeologists, they're a rare breed, and I love them. They can tell a story.
Yes, they can.
Dr. Squee, what are you a doctor of?
Oh, well, like this may be further fake news of podcasting. Podcasting, that'll do it. It's a very specialized PhD.
You seem to be specialized, yeah.
Thank you very much. So, Brian, when did you first get involved in this? Brian M, sorry.
I got involved pretty late because I think that they had a lot of the film in place, and Emery is I know Brian through science communication circles more virtually than now I know him better, but Emery and I have known each other for decades as comedians. We go way back, previous century, the one just before this one, but a previous century, nevertheless. And he saw me on one of these shows he was looking at called Strange Evidence. And he saw that I was in a segment. And when he reached out to me, I had a story.
Yes, he did.
That was the bit which shocked me the most. It's like, I mean, okay, it didn't surprise me that shock horror, some less reputable documentary makers use people out of context, but directly asking comedians who just do a science podcast or a show where they talk to scientists and describing them as an expert in neuroscience and just all this, that seemed like the real kind of kicker to me.
Oh yeah, although it's true, I've interviewed a lot of scientists, but they didn't even know that. They only knew that I was I didn't have an active project that they were aware of. They reached out to me as a comedian, science comedian. And then when we got in the studio and they showed me the clips only the night before, and I didn't think they were going to be so pseudoscience. I thought they were going to be weird science things that we talk about what's going on, but none of them were. They were all spirit walkers and ghosts and UFOs. And then they said they didn't want me to be funny because the tone of it was like, it's dramatic. They didn't want me to be funny at all. They hired a comedian and then they told me not to be funny. And then as far as the science part goes, they just made up the rest. They just decided to call me a journalist without telling me. And it really is after the film came out that I realized that they must have even planned this part, because they specifically shot these scenes where I'm walking to my office. It's not my office. It's stuff they asked me to do so they could later call me a journalist who analyzes the latest updates in robotic technology. And that was purely made up. I'm a comedian who came in and said, I know a little something about this. I could say this. And then they ran with it. But they had to have planned it. That's what I didn't realize till the movie was done. It's that they shot those scenes knowing what they were going to do.
You see, I do get the feeling from the experiences you're talking about there, that it's almost like this is what they do with these genuine science. Like we'll talk a bit about Dr. Oz in a minute. And the fact that I bet he had that conversation at one stage, perfectly reputable scientist. And it's almost like they wooed him with fame. Like, you guys didn't seem to be so wooed, but I feel like it was the same conversation which happened to him years ago, which took him down this path. Did you get that feeling? To either of you?
Which guy do you mean? Do you mean like
Dr. Oz?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, it seems like when you're saying about the way that they talk to you, and they were like, almost to begin with, they're going, yeah, we know you're a comedian, but maybe we could talk a bit about the science. Then it's like, maybe we could just drop the comedy. Maybe we could just call you a robotic scientist. And just, it seems like those who are more interested in fame are more won over by those arguments over time.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
that's actually known to be Dr. Oz's story. He used to be an occasional guest on the Oprah show, and he would give generally good medical advice. And then as he became more and more of a popular guest, and he started becoming a paid guest and a paid regular guest, then he was just happy to say whatever they paid him to say. And by the time they offered him his own show, the money was so giant, he couldn't give a flying flip what it was that he said, as long as the checks kept coming in. So most of us who do science communication never achieve that level of stratospheric income. And so the temptation is not necessarily there. We end up being more concerned about our careers and our reputations.
But there, for the grace of God, it would only take you guys to fall for that flim-flam from the kind of people making the documentaries at the time to then go down that path.
Well, I don't mean to suggest that there's a price on my integrity. I mean, I suppose everything has a price, but we're not likely to get there. I know enough other working scientists and everything who deeply believe in the importance of what we do for a living, and that's I think creates a much more satisfying life than selling out. Bands love to sell out. That's what bands try to do. But for a scientist to sell out and actually do harm to the world, that's a whole other level. Not all
bands, Brian. Not all bands.
For some, it's still all about the music.
But I'm with you. I'm not even a scientist. I'm just a comedian. But I care about these issues too. I can't imagine doing that. And the fact that it's not even just a comedian or an actor, but the fact that someone like Oz, who's some kind of doctor, like anyone with any credentials, just makes it even creepier and worse. And most people I know in the whole field, whether they're scientists or just science communicators, wouldn't dream of doing that, because we love the science and that's what we want to share. And like, sure, we want money, but it just wouldn't even make sense to go down that path.
I mean, and it doesn't feel like you've even, like, it like you say, there's a worse sin on it if they are a genuine scientist, they are a genuine doctor. But it's like those micro lies. Like there's a thing which I saw online, which was someone who does a workout thing, and they call themselves Dr. Joe. And at the beginning, it's got this huge disclaimer about how they're not a doctor, and they end each show with, "And you can trust me, I'm a doctor." The whole point is you're not a real doctor. Like, it's like me saying that. I mean, I blush a little bit when I'm talking to actual doctors, and I use that silly name on my show. But like I don't ever try and go, well, trust me, because I'm a doctor. Like I'm not. I'm someone who does radio.
I perform for a lot of science-oriented crowds and scientists, so I often say I'm not a doctor, but I play one in the broken dreams of my parents. And it's not even a joke. It's not even a joke.
People often ask us, why do you have comedians in this movie? This movie is supposed to be about scientists who get misrepresented. Well, we're criticizing the practice of deceptively editing the experts you have on your show. That happened to Brian, who is a comedian, and yet they not only deceptively portrayed him as a science journalist, they then deceptively portrayed what he was saying. And we also have a cryptozoologist in the film. Now, people might throw up their hands and go, well, how do you let a cryptozoologist? Well, it doesn't matter. He is another expert that the show had on as an expert to talk about his experience and his expertise, and they deceptively edited him to make it sound like he was saying the opposite of what he was saying. So it's not just about presenting good science. It's about being honest in how you're presenting people, which is arguably at least as important.
Yeah, and I'm not as bothered by, it does bother me that they didn't want to really pay me and I eked something out of them, and it was more about, they want to go with exposure. It's like a documentary, but they didn't even represent me as who I am. The one thing I could have gotten was exposure as science comedian, so they didn't even give me that. But worse than that is that the public thought they were listening to someone who's a journalist who keeps up with this specific stuff. And worse than that is what they did with the scientists. This was my experience and why I'm in it, and I have it in common. But it's not as bad as taking a shark expert and getting him to talk about some mythological creature and then cutting out the parts where he says, well, this is what the myth, here's how the myth goes, and making it sound like he believes. That's way worse in every way than what happened to me.
Yeah, and when they cut him next to some guys who just happened to have this shark diving tank, had no expertise, and cut them on like they were colleagues. And that just seems like the bitterest pill to me. We've got another comment from the floor from an Emery Emery. So good they named him twice. It's interesting going well. I mean, as well as it can go without the director. So just in case anyone thinks we're silencing him, there he is.
Yeah, apparently he's available after all.
Oh,
very
God,
shy.
that
very
does sound
shy,
like
though.
a conspiracy theory to me. Apparently he's available after all. What happened to him?
He's being silenced. It's like, one of the things, I don't think this is in the documentary, but this Animal Planet mock documentary that acted like mermaids were real with fake found footage and an actor playing a scientist who was like, mermaids are real. They also said, hey, check out our website. And there was this idea of a government conspiracy. That's why we haven't heard the truth about mermaids, is government conspiracy, of course. And then they said, go check out this website. It was part of like peripheral promo for the thing. And if you went to the website, there was a takedown notice as if the government had shut it down, and it just convinced you that the whole thing is even more real.
They go for the whole performance art thing, yeah.
You can't say they don't think these things through. I'll at least say that for them.
Right.
I mean, I think the scariest thing about this is, another example which you used was with, oh God, its name's going to suddenly escape me. One of the most amazing scientists of our time, Richard Dawkins. Sorry, mine just went blank for a second. The thing which kind of really troubled me about that is not only the way in which they've used, again, one of our best scientific minds, they've twisted his words, they've given him questions to set him up to say something and then take out of context. But I actually know someone who kind of like, I blush at using this term, but I think it's actually appropriate, who kind of got radicalized. I've got a friend whose his father has kind of gone towards believing any conspiracy theory. So when I say radicalized, towards conspiracy theories. To the point where you just cannot convince them of anything else because the lie is self-sustaining. When they co-opt people sort of like, if you like, on our side, the side of truth, that's when it gets really, really disturbing. That's when it kind of like, it becomes even harder to reach those people. Do you think there's any kind of solution to that? Any way around that when you're trying to kind of talk to people and relate to people who've been won over by this stuff?
That's a really difficult question. The main thing that I do is a science podcast, Skeptoid, And in 16 years, I've covered 850 something topics. And so I often get a question that says, my mom, dad, friend, partner, coworker, whoever believes in this weird conspiracy theory. Do you have an episode of your show that I can play for them that'll, convince them that that's false? And I say, well, I do have an episode, but don't play that for them. If you directly attack someone's sacred cow, someone's cherished belief, they're going to shut down. They're going to turn you off. They don't want to hear anything else you have to say. Instead, what I always recommend is play them an episode for something that they're going to agree with, and get them interested in the process of how we find out what we know and how we know things are true and how we tell what's real from what's not. And if you can get them interested in that process, then they'll come around eventually on their own to start questioning some of their beliefs that don't make that muster. And so again, that comes back to process. And the process that we talk about in science friction is about effectively communicating honestly. And that if that process is broken, then the whole system is broken. And so, I guess that's a pretty good segue, but I just felt it was really important to make this film and to make people aware that the process is being abused.
Just very quickly from Aaron Freeman, what publication or group are you talking about? Well, we're talking about Science Friction, but the documentary, which you can check out now whenever you get your streaming or downloaded services. But talk a bit about your publication, just to give that a quick plug. Sorry, Brian D.
Okay, the podcast, you mean?
Yes, sorry, just because you're talking about them.
So I was just referring to my podcast, which is Skeptoid. It's been in the iTunes top social sciences podcast for like 10 years. And it's at skeptoid.com or wherever you get your podcasts. The film he's talking about is Science Friction. That's our new feature documentary. If you go to sciencefriction.tv, there are links to, I think, the IMDb page, which is where it's going to give you the best places where you can currently stream it in your current region. It's a brand new release, and it's not thoroughly indexed in the streaming services yet, so it can be hard to find. But sciencefriction.tv, and there's a link to the IMDb page on where you can find it.
And Aaron, these guys, this guy Brian and the director who couldn't be here, Emery, and another guy that were on my show recently. I interviewed them a week or two ago, and it was the Science Friction episode.
Oh, yeah. I see. So now you're fun. Just plugging like competing interviews now. I see.
Well,
I see.
The thing is, but I brought you. But look, because I posted this on my channel, that's a guy I know. He's watching on my channel, I think. So look, it all works out.
I'm only kidding. I know
or at least that's what we tell you. But with the way we edit it, it's going to make you look terrible.
I know we're such stunningly interesting people that we'll each have come up with completely different questions, though. I have no fear of that.
I'm not even going to call you Dr. Squee. I'm going to call you a science journalist.
Actually, genuinely, people sometimes call me doctor on this, and I go, no, please, Squee. Squee's fine. Please don't just call me a doctor. So yeah, I mean, a couple of the people we've talked about. So first of all, we're talking about Dr. Oz there, and I believe he's now running for political office. How disturbing to all this is it that when these people are manipulating the truth, they're then directly going to the sources where they can control the narrative so directly?
That's a very terrifying thing. The way things are looking right now, it seems pretty clear that we're going to have President Oz here very soon. And this is someone who literally makes a living lying and giving harmful misinformation out. That is how he makes his living. And this person is he already a senator? I forget. I don't even know. Or is that the midterms he's running?
I think he's running at the moment.
I think he's running.
That's
the
last thing I heard.
So yeah, I mean, you're highlighting the importance of having an informed audience who can tell when they're being lied to. You got to start everyone out with a general science literacy. Everyone's got to have a general basic science literacy so you can get out there in the world and start recognizing that doesn't sound right to me.
Oh, and I'm definitely going to shout this one out from Aaron. Go Team Science. Yes, I think Team Science needs all the pep talk it can get right now. And Oprah's the other one we mentioned there, where Dr. Oz has been on her show. It's really troubling when you hear someone like Oprah, someone who is so trusted and is so right on so many things, gets it so wrong. So she literally had someone debunked a spiritualist or a clairvoyant being debunked on her show, and then just cuts the bit where it gets debunked.
Yeah.
That is so worrying.
You point out that Oprah is trusted and gives out a lot of good information, and that's true. And if you were to sit and watch seasons of the Oprah show, which thankfully is no longer on, you would find probably 90% good or normal or harmless information, and then 10% of this misinformation, where she was promoting Dr. Oz, promoting skeptics, promoting psychics, promoting people who lie for a living. And I argue that it's even more harmful when you have good information mixed in with the misinformation. Like the Rogan show is a perfect example of that. Most of it's harmless, but he's got a lot of harmful misinformation too. And the audience, then, they don't know which one they're getting. If it's someone who is consistently lying, consistently giving misinformation, that's less of a problem, because that person can be cut out and filtered and muted, and people generally know their reputation. It's when you get this mixture that it becomes really tricky and really more dangerous.
That's what it made me think of, because when Trump became president, as disturbing as that was to a large number of us, I'm not going to declare that for everyone, but a large number of us, at least you knew that kind of he wasn't trusted by anyone but his fan base. Where you get to kind of someone like Oprah, because that name was floated about, people going and say, oh, well, if we're going to go down the celebrity route, wouldn't Oprah be great? And I was kind of like, I got won over by that. And then you hear stuff like this, and how dangerous it would be if she, as you say, sold a lot of misinformation with a lot of the good information where she's so trusted. It's just very scary times with all this. The other thing which I did notice is there were a lot of contributors who were British. And do you think there is another bias? Sorry about the noise from the dogs in the background. Do you think there is a bias towards how information is passed out to try and use voices? Because, like, there's a stereotype of British voices being more reliable. When you think science, let's talk to a Brit. And do you think that's a manipulation they use as well?
I haven't seen that. The one that consistently came up during the production for this was that we had our early cuts of the film, and we're looking at it and going, this is all white men, and we're going to get accused of being, racist and sexist for only showing white men in our film. Well, we go back and we look at the reason for that, and it's because the sample that we were given is people who go on these TV shows as experts. Well, it turns out that community is almost entirely white men. And the reason being, as a number of our experts told us, is these producers, they want Indiana Jones. They want the trusted expert. They don't want someone who looks like a college kid or someone from some diverse community. They want Indiana Jones. And so we had to go back, and as we were looking for additional experts, we had to make a special strong effort to only limit it to women and people of color. And we got about as many as we could, and it's still not it's not a very representative sample. But I want to stress that was the TV show's fault. That wasn't our fault. And it does have an important impact, because the people who watch these TV shows and get inspired to become scientists, they get inspired oftentimes based on whether there's someone who looks like them on the TV show. And if there's not, then that's another problem. In fact, some people said, hey, that's the movie you guys should be making, about how they do that. And we go, okay, well, great. That's another movie. We have several movies that that were suggested by the production of this one.
We do have another comment from Aaron. He's just asking about how does misinformation harm Oprah's viewers? I feel like I could have a stab at this, but I'll hand it over to you guys.
Well,
and by the way,
if you're promoting, if you have Oz on there and promoting him as an expert and a genius, and he's come on before and he's always full of great information, and then what he says is, here's a thing that will cure, here's something for a specific health problem, and you take his advice instead of following good sound medical advice, then you're being harmed by Oprah.
Yep. Simple as that.
Yep, I think that's about right. And also he raises a fair point. There are only white men on my screen now, and I will take that, because I do my best to try and invite on a diverse group of people onto my interview show. It is down to, like, I am not the biggest kind of draw. Like, I like to have a modest audience, but I kind of have to take who says yes. So I do try my best to balance that over time.
Squee, I had the same thing when I had this very show where my guests were me, a white man. I mean, I'm Jewish. Does that count for something? But
That's my diversity quota fixed.
And I had Brian Dunning, and I had Emery Emery, and I had Matt Kirshen, who, okay, so what I had was the two, it happens to be that they were white men that made the documentary, and the one other guy that I know in it who was a comedian. And so there were 4 white men. But I was, a friend of mine pointed out this issue, and what I said is, you know, I had done 10 shows up to that point. 70%, 7 were women guests and 3 men. So I was doing good there. And I had a little diversity, but not as much as I'm striving. So I'm making an effort, but it's hard to judge by one episode. But yeah, here we are. We are 3 white men. It's going to happen, but at least I think that, like me, you're making efforts to try to keep the balance.
You do.
Better.
You do try your best. There we go. That's the best answer I've got for that anyway.
Now I have to block you, Aaron.
Were these all kind of new interviews which you used for this as well? Were there any kind of stock interviews used for some of the documentary?
The only one that was stock was Z-Dog MD. Z-Dog wanted to be in the show, but he honestly didn't have time at the time that we were available to shoot him. And he said, "Can you use something from my existing videos?" Because he had videos where he was talking exactly about that movie Plandemic, and that actually ended up working very well. So we just dropped his footage in with his permission and made it look like he was just another interview in the film.
And then in that case, I have my
Lies,
follow-up
all
questions.
lies.
Yeah, there was one bit of stock footage. It's all fake. Then Richard Dawkins, how did that come about that you got him involved? I mean, I know he's always so keen to talk about this kind of thing.
Yeah, so Richard and a number of the other people too, we caught at an annual conference where we all go to, the SciCon conference in Las Vegas. And one year we just kind of gathered everyone there who had a story to tell, and we took them over to a suite across the street at the Luxor and interviewed them there. And he was there. Emery knows him fairly well, and so we didn't have any trouble getting him in. And of course, his story with Expelled was pretty well known. So it's a great inclusion for the film.
Pardon me, one of my dogs has just decided to go absolutely mental at the window for no apparent reason. So, just going to shut the door for a sec. Pardon me. Funnily enough, I actually interviewed Richard Dawkins' wife, Lala Ward, quite a while back. She was a dog tea companion. That's a very, very another story, but it's just not often that I end up interviewing someone who one of my interviews has interviewed. So one thing which you talked about is I like the fact that you do take on, again, as I said before, like the more obvious people who manipulate and the less obvious. One of them was the BBC. That's one which kind of like is really saddening whenever I hear that. Again, it's one of those things of when someone is a trusted bastion of news and information, and then they sink that low. It hurts even more, I feel like. So this was about acupuncture being used for operations as opposed to anesthetic. And like the thing which made me think about this was there was an episode, I think it was of Scrubs, which I know is a bizarre thing to pull on, but it's when it seeps into culture like that, that from that assumption that happens, then you put it into comedies or dramas and then becomes more real that that's a real thing. Because I saw a documentary on that and they're referencing that. It's disturbing how it can snowball. Can you talk a bit about that example and how they manipulate that one?
So in the BBC example, it was that was one of the cases in the film where we weren't having a scientist whose words were misrepresented, but the producers of that segment on BBC very deliberately misrepresented. In fact, I mean, it was a lie of omission so big you've got to call it a lie. They straight up lied about the nature of this surgery that they were presenting, as if acupuncture was a substitute for anesthesia. So because Simon Singh, who presented that segment, he's a very well respected science communicator in the UK. We thought that'd be great having him on and talk about his experience with trying to get the BBC to correct that error. Because a lot of these scientists and a lot of these segments, they did go back to the producers of the shows and say, "What the heck did you do to me? I did not say that." In fact, two of them, the shark scientist and the dinosaur scientist, they actually got the shows to fix those segments. And I think their universities may have even had to get involved and probably had to threaten to sue them for all I know. I don't have the details on that, but they did manage to get those re-edited, which is surprising. Also made it harder for us to get the original footage to show in the film.
Yeah.
But
that was another troubling thing about it, was he was saying, it's like, look, I'm just someone who's kind of like really watching that. I've got a science background, but this is my area. Why weren't there outcries from the scientific community at large? Why wasn't it more people in surgery who were challenging this and taking on this fight? That's quite troubling that it's become so commonplace that people would rather complain about it over the over lunch in the canteen and then go back to work because it's so prevalent. It's just too much to fight.
Yeah. Why is Simon Singh, who's a particle physicist, having to be the one to lead this battle against the BBC when every freaking anesthesiologist in the country who saw the show knew that it was BS? They knew that it was false information. It's just unfortunate that more people don't get involved and join the fight.
Totally. And do you see any hope for any better regulation of this sort of thing, about any kind of controls being put on this?
Absolutely not. Next question. What? No, you want to take that one, Brian?
Yes, I mean this comes up a lot personally, and this is very debatable. But my personal feeling is that you cannot try and have an arbiter of what's true and what's not, because that process by its very nature is going to be automatically biased again. I think the solution is for us to put out better programming to compete with and blow these other shows out of the water. I think we need to create a culture where good programming gets its due. Any of these shows could have been made honestly. It's just more work to dig deeper into the mystery and find, okay, let's just say that aliens built the pyramid because that's easy. But if you dug deeper, you could go into how we know that aliens didn't build the pyramids and go into some of the real science that's being done, some of which is crazy amazing. I mean, just in the last few years, there have been some major discoveries in the history of the pyramids. Who's heard about that? Nobody, because it's not being broadcast on Ancient Aliens. So there is an opportunity out there that's huge, which is for producers, directors, scientists, top science communicators to get more on board with making better programming that can compete with these terrible shows.
I so almost want to go off on tangent from that, just because you brought up Ancient Aliens. And it was that bit where they kind of, in that program, they zoom in on a sarcophagus and they take this little bit and they go, clearly, that's an alien space console. Now, I've watched every episode of Doctor Who and Star Trek, and it looked nothing like anything I've seen. It was really, I don't even get their premise. I don't even buy into, because sometimes they just take some out concepts and go, oh, this could kind of look like this. It didn't even look like what they were saying it did.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. They take the laziest route possible to make these shows. They do no work at all. I mean, if you remember, History Channel even briefly had a TV show called The Mayans. There is no such word as Mayans. The word Mayan refers to the language, the culture. The word Maya is what refers to the people, including the plural. So they actually did not even get the only word in their title right. That is how lazy they are. They did actually go back and they retitled the show The Maya, but only after this big outcry on Twitter with all the archaeologists in the world making fun of them. I mean, that's an astounding level of laziness, and that's the norm in these.
I'm not sure if you should totally discount their story just because primitive people's artistic abilities weren't as vivid and as good as they are today. I mean, maybe that's the best. They'd never seen a spaceship before.
I just love the idea that Kurt Sutter, who made Sons of Anarchy, his spin-off, The Mayan, like, I think he might have been more scientifically literate than the History Channel.
Probably. It's not hard.
And finally, is there any kind of like plan on any follow-up for this? Because I think there's kind of a lot more to pick from the bones of this particular feast.
Fallout, meaning like, are the TV networks?
No, any follow-up. Sorry, follow-up to.
Follow-up.
No, I'm sure there'll be lots of fallout, but not from anyone worth listening to.
So obviously, we are working on the next film already. We're in pre-production on that, just figuring out the stories and everything. If anyone's interested in that, again, come to the website for this film, sciencefriction.tv, and there's a little form you can fill out. Just put in your email address, and we'll keep you posted about the next movie. Whoops. And, you know,
is that
you got to
science
say
friction?
science friction. That's a good title.
Hopefully
Write that
not,
down.
maybe. All right. I want royalties.
I
I was promised, and I want to be identified as a science journalist.
Okay. Can do.
Sorry, I did say finally, there was actually one thing I wanted to ask, and we've sort of talked a little about the political side to this, and sorry, I think it's inseparable now because those lines have become so blurred. Like, I've always been brought up with the kind of thing of like, just because someone votes differently from you doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to them. But that's becoming harder and harder, I feel, when one side of the equation seems to go more feeling based and more towards whatever will be populist, as opposed to listening to facts. Do you have trouble kind of like squaring that circle yourselves?
I certainly don't. I mean, a few years ago, I went to all of my news feed sources and I muted out everything that's not, that little media bias chart that shows, all the news organizations with left and right and unreliable at the bottom, and then it comes to the top, and here's like, Reuters and NPR News and like the 3 or 4 that are actually unbiased and accurate. I muted out everything else in there. And so my news feed is no longer polluted with crap, no matter which side it comes from, the left or the right. And that's important because, again, we're an educational nonprofit. We have to be politically unbiased. We don't talk about politics or religion or anything. We try to stick with the practice. And a bad practice can be done by anyone, whoever they are. It's a very dangerous road to go down when you start putting everything into tribalism terms, saying our side is always right and they are always wrong, because everyone in the world feels that way, and obviously they can't all be right. In fact, they're all wrong.
That's true, but I think the moment where it became more difficult with that for me is when, I'm sorry, but it is the right who turned against science en masse when it came to COVID, especially, and lots of other things. But COVID's the main kind of like big one. I don't know how to stay non-partisan when a particular party turns against science in such a big way. I'm sure there's loads of examples of when the left, individually have done so, but not on that scale. That's the tough one for me.
Yeah, that's a big scale. It's been a big scale for sure. COVID was huge. Go ahead.
And in fairness, I mean, there are people on the left that before COVID that were anti-vax. So you have this weird, you have people on the right that are, but you have some portion of people on the left that are for different reasons, I suppose, or maybe the same reason. I don't even know. I can't understand it either, but there is a preponderance, it seems, on most of these things: evolution, climate change, GMOs, COVID. It's going against the preponderance of evidence and experts.
Yeah.
There is misinformation all across the political spectrum. No group is immune to it. Every group thinks that theirs is the one immune to misinformation. It's not.
I don't believe that, but it's like, it used to be that was the kind of fringe of the parties. When you've got it at the top, when it's saying policy based on anti-science, that's when that party are then culpable as a whole, as opposed to individuals.
Yeah. I agree with you. There's been definitely a scale that we haven't seen these past few years with COVID.
Yeah. Thank you very much, gents. This has been absolutely a treat for me. Thank you. I love all this stuff. I can't wait for the follow-up documentary. Hopefully you'll join me again to talk about that then. But in the meantime, thank you very much to Brian M.
On behalf of Emery Emery, you can find Science Friction in some countries on Amazon Prime and on Tubi TV.
Oh, and have you got anything else you'd like to plug?
You can find me. I'm at Science Comedian everywhere. Check out my YouTube channel. That's where I'm doing the show that's setting out to destroy Dr. Squee. No, I'm kidding.
And Brian D, thank you very much for joining us. Anything apart from the documentary and the follow-up you'd like to plug?
Subscribe to Skeptoid, my podcast, and watch the film, sciencefriction.tv.
Brilliant. Oh, and gents, sorry, I am going to slightly spring this on you, and don't worry if you can't think of anything at the moment. But we have a musical theme every week on the radio version of the show. This week we're going for superheroes on Tuesday. Have you got a superhero theme song you'd like to hear?
I like the song That's Really Super Supergirl by XTC.
Supergirl.
That's really super Supergirl.
That's really Supergirl.
Comma.
Okay.
There's a comma. It's addressing Supergirl.
That's cool. That's cool. And Brandy?
And I want the theme song from the old animated Saturday morning cartoon superhero show, The Mighty Heroes.
Done and
That's
done.
a deep cut.
No, I'm always happy for that. I might have to find that one on YouTube or something, but it'll be in there. Thank you very much, guys. If you happen to be on a loose end for anyone on a Tuesday and you fancy listening to some fantastic radio, please join us from 6 till 8 UK time. Please check against your local times on a Tuesday, and that's swradio.co.uk. You can listen to it around the world. And yeah, not only will you be able to hear this fantastic interview, but also some wonderful music such as has just been requested by the gents. Thanks, guys. You have a wonderful morning, evening, and night. I've been Dr. Squee. That was my show. And until next time, in a world where you can literally be anything, please be kind and science literate.